Today we are going to dig into just two chapters, 27 and 28, and what we're going to be doing today is focusing on character traits, but in a little bit of a different way. We're actually going to compare characters today. So the two characters that we're going to be focusing on are Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski. Now remember, we've learned a lot about these two guys so far. Okay, so I have the character trait anchor chart up here because you're going to have to remember things about character to compare them. So we know that when we describe characters, we can describe how they're feeling, but we can also describe how they're acting, how they're thinking, how they're speaking. We can just talk about them in general. What kind of person are they? And remember, character traits can also be outside traits. Boy, girl, tall, short, those kinds of things, right? So today when we're reading, I want you to be asking yourself, how are Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski the same? Okay? And then how are they different? Okay, so what is at least two ways that they are the same, and then I want you to give me at least two ways that they are different. And when you're talking about them being different, I really want you to pull from these character traits, okay? Give me some words that describe them. We already know that Mr. Sir and Stanley don't get along, right? That had a lot to do with Stanley stealing the sunflower seeds, right? Well, claiming to have stolen the sunflower seeds. But we also know that Mr. Pendanski has kind of been there to help the boys, okay? So think back on your background knowledge, which is everything up to this chapter, okay? And then the two chapters that we read today. And then when you get done, you're going to have a Venn diagram, and you're going to tell me how they're the same and how they are different, okay? So we're on chapter 27, page 116, all right? And let's go ahead and get started. Stanley dug his shovel into the ground. His hole was about 3.5 feet deep in the center. He grunted as he pried up some dirt, then flung it off to the side. The sun was almost directly overhead. It's probably pretty hot, right? He glanced at his canteen lying beside his hole. He knew it was half full, but he didn't take a drink just yet. He had to drink sparingly. That means be really careful with how much he drank. Can't drink a whole lot. Because he didn't know who would be driving the truck next time it came. 3 days had passed since the warden had scratched Mr. Sir. And every time Mr. Sir delivered water, he poured Stanley's straight on the ground. Boom. That is a great point to stop and ask yourself, what word could be used to describe Mr. Sir there? Stanley is a boy. He is a kid. Mr. Sir is an adult. And every time Mr. Sir comes to fill up their canteen, instead of putting it under Stanley's cup, he's just pouring the water cooler and it's going straight to the ground. Okay? Think of a word that you could use to describe there. Fortunately, Mr. Pendanski delivered the water more often than Mr. Sir. Mr. Pendanski was obviously aware of what Mr. Sir was doing because he always gave Stanley a little bit extra. He'd fill Stanley's canteen, then let Stanley take a long drink, and then top it off for him. So what kind of character trait can we use to describe Mr. Pendanski? How is he acting? Well, Mr. Sir was dumping it on the ground, but Mr. Pendanski was filling it up, letting Stanley take a drink, and then letting him have more. So, is that how they are the same, or is that how they are different? Okay, keep that in mind. That'll help you when you do your organizer. It helped, too, that Zero was digging some of Stanley's hole for him. Remember, they made a deal, right? Stanley would teach him how to read for an hour a day if Zero would dig his hole an hour a day. Although, as Stanley had expected, the other boys didn't like to see Stanley sitting around while they were working. They say things like, "Who died and made you king?" Or, "It must be nice to have your own personal slave." When he tried pointing out that he was the one that took the blame for the sunflower seeds, the other boys said it was his fault because he was the one who spilled them. "I risked my life for those seeds," Magnet said, "and all I got was one lousy handful." Stanley also tried to explain that he needed to save his energy so he could teach Zero how to read, but the other boys just mocked him. That means made fun of him. "Same old story, ain't an armpit," X-Ray said. "The white boy sits around while the black boy does all the work. Ain't that right, caveman?" "No, that's not right," Stanley replied. "No, it ain't," X-Ray agreed. "It ain't right at all." So X-Ray isn't understanding the deal that Stanley and Zero have made. It has nothing to do with what color their skin is. And it has everything to do with the fact that Stanley is going to spend an hour of his time teaching Zero to read. So Zero wants to help Stanley by helping him get his hole dug faster. So that way, Stanley can teach him how to read, right? They have a deal. They have a partnership. It has nothing to do with their name, where they're from, the color of their skin, but X-Ray's not seeing that, right? X-Ray's trying to make it about something else. Stanley dug out another shovel full of dirt. He knew X-Ray wouldn't have been talking like that if he was the one teaching Zero how to read. Then X-Ray would be talking about how important it was that he got his rest, right? So he could be a better teacher, right? And that was true. He did have to save his strength so he could be a better teacher, although Zero was a really quick learner. Sometimes, in fact, Stanley hoped the warden was watching them with her secret cameras and microphones, so she knew that Zero wasn't as stupid as everyone had thought. So Stanley's idea of Zero is kind of starting to change, right? Remember a couple chapters ago, Stanley was calling Zero a nobody. And now he's like, Zero's actually really smart, right? Like his perception, okay, his perspective of Zero has changed. From across the lake, he could see the approaching dust cloud. He took a drink from his canteen, then waited to see who was driving the truck. The swelling on Mr. Sir's face had gone down, but it was still a little puffy. There had been 3 scratch marks down his cheek. 2 of the marks had faded, but the middle scratch must have been the deepest because it still remained. It was a jagged purple line running from below his eye to below his mouth, like a tattoo of a scar. Stanley waited in line and then handed him his canteen. Mr. Sir held it up to his ear and shook it, and he smiled at the swishing sound. Stanley hoped he wouldn't dump it out. To his surprise, Mr. Sir held the canteen under the stream of water and filled it. "Wait here," he said. Still holding Stanley's canteen, Mr. Sir walked past him, then went around the side of the truck and into the cab, where he couldn't be seen. "What's he doing in there?" asked Zero. "I wish I knew," said Stanley. A short while later, Mr. Sir came out of the truck and handed Stanley his canteen. It was still full. "Thank you, Mr. Sir." Mr. Sir smiled at him. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. "Drink up." He popped some sunflower seeds into his mouth, chewed, and spit out the shells. Stanley was afraid to drink it. He hated to think the kind of vile substance that Mr. Sir might have put in it. Do you think Mr. Sir really put water in Stanley's canteen, or do you think Mr. Sir maybe had done something else to Stanley's canteen? What does that make Mr. Sir? What do you think he put in the canteen? What word can we use to describe him for that? Okay, it's going to help you when you're trying to figure out how Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski are the same and how they are different. I'm on the top of page 119, kiddos. He brought the canteen back to his hole. For a long time, he left it beside his hole as he continued to dig. Then, when he was so thirsty that he could hardly stand it anymore, he unscrewed the cap, turned the canteen over, and poured it all out onto the dirt. He was afraid that if he'd waited another second, he might have taken a drink. So Stanley thinks that Mr. Sir did something to it, right? And I'm almost pretty positive that Mr. Sir probably peed in it. That's what I'm thinking, right? Ugh. After Stanley taught Zero the final 6 letters of the alphabet, he taught him how to write his name. Capital Z-E-R-O. Zero wrote the letters as Stanley said them. "Zero," he said, looking at his piece of paper. His smile was too big for his face. Stanley watched him write it over and over again. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. In a way, it made him sad. He couldn't help but think 100 times 0 was still nothing. "You know, that's not my real name," Zero said, as they headed back to the rec room for dinner. "Well, yeah," Stanley guessed. "I guess I knew that." He had never really been sure. "Everyone's always called me Zero, even before I came here." "Oh, okay. My real name is Hector." "Hector," Stanley repeated. "Hector Zeroni. Where in the world have we heard the name Zeroni?" All right, kiddos, I'm on the top of page 28, chapter 28, page 120. After 20 years, Kate Barlow returned to Green Lake. Ooh, we're going back in time again, right? Back to 110 years ago, kissing Kate Barlow. It was a place where nobody would ever find her. A ghost town on a ghost lake. Peach trees had all died. There were a couple of small oak trees still growing by the abandoned old cabin. The cabin used to be on the eastern shore of the lake. Now the edge of the lake was over 5 miles away, and it was little more than a small pond full of dirty water. Remember, after Sam was killed, it never rained a drop since. So what's happening to the lake? It's drying up. No rain, really hot sun. The water's all going to evaporate, and there's not going to be a lake anymore. She lived in the cabin. Sometimes she could hear Sam's voice echoing across the emptiness. Onions, sweet fresh onions. She knew she was crazy. She knew she'd been crazy for the last 20 years. Oh, Sam, she would say, speaking into the vast emptiness. I know it's hot, but I feel so very cold. My hands are cold. My feet are cold. My face is cold. My heart is cold. And sometimes she would hear him say, I can fix that. And she'd feel his warm arm across her shoulders. She'd been living in the cabin about 3 months when she was awakened one morning by someone kicking open the cabin door. She opened her eyes to see the blurry end of a rifle, 2 inches from her nose. She could smell Trout Walker's dirty feet. Remember Trout Walker, Charles Walker, right? He was the man that chased Sam out of town. He's the man that gung-hoed the idea that Sam needed to be punished, right? So Trout Walker we know is a bad dude. You've got exactly 10 seconds to tell me where you've hidden your loot, said Trout. Remember, Kate Barlow was an outlaw, right? She robbed people, so he's calling it your loot, her hidden treasure. Or else I'll blow your head off. She yawned. A red-headed woman was there with Trout. Kate could see her rummaging through the cabin, dumping drawers and knocking things from the shelves and cabinets. The woman came to her. Where is it? She demanded. Linda Miller? Asked Kate. Is that you? Linda Miller had been in the 4th grade when Kate Barlow was still a teacher. She was a cute freckle-faced girl with beautiful red hair. Now her face was blotchy and her hair was dirty and scraggly. It's Linda Walker now, said Trout. Oh, Linda, I'm so sorry, said Kate. Trout jabbed her throat with the rifle. Where's the loot? There is no loot, said Kate. Don't give me that, shouted Trout. You robbed every bank from here to Houston. You better tell him, said Linda. We're desperate. You married him for his money, didn't you, Kate? Linda nodded. But it's all gone. It dried up with the lake. Ooh, can't get my page to turn. The peach trees, the livestock. I kept thinking it has to rain soon. The drought can't last forever. But it just kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Her eyes fixed on the shovel, which was leaned up against the fireplace. She's buried it, she declared. I don't know what you're talking about, said Kate. There was a loud blast as Trout fired his rifle just above her head. The window behind her shattered. Where is it buried? He demanded. Go ahead and kill me, Trout, said Kate. But I sure hope you like to dig, because you're going to be digging for a long time. It's a vast wasteland out there. You and your children and their children can dig for the next 100 years, and you'll never find it. So Kate's saying, I did bury something out there, right? And you can dig all you want, but you're never going to find it. Linda grabbed Kate's hair and jerked her head back. No, we're not going to kill you, she said. By the time we're finished with you, you're going to wish you were dead. I've been wishing I was dead for the last 20 years, said Kate. They dragged her out of bed and pushed her outside. She wore blue silk pajamas. Her turquoise-studded black boots remained beside her bed. They loosely tied her legs together so she could walk, but couldn't run. They made her walk barefoot on the hot ground. They wouldn't let her stop walking. Not until you take us to the loot, said Trout. Linda hit Kate on the back of the legs with a shovel. You're going to take us to it sooner or later, so you might as well make it sooner. She walked one way, then the other, until her feet were black and blistered. Whenever she stopped, Linda whacked her with the shovel. I'm losing my patience, warned Trout. She felt the shovel jab into her back, and she fell onto the hard dirt. Get up, ordered Linda. Kate struggled to her feet. We're being easy on you today, said Trout. It's just gonna keep getting worse and worse for you until you take us to it. Look out, shouted Linda. A lizard leaped toward them. Kate could see its big red eyes. Linda tried to hit it with a shovel and Trout shot at it, but they both missed. The lizard landed on Kate's bare ankle. Its sharp, black teeth bit into her leg. Its white tongue lapped up the droplets of blood that leaked out of the wound. Kate smiled. There was nothing they could do to her anymore. Start digging, she said. Where is it? Linda screeched. Where'd you bury it? Trout demanded. Kate Barlow died laughing. What bit her? A yellow-spotted lizard, right? Okay, so Kate Barlow spends 20 years robbing every bank, right? Then she goes back to Green Lake. It's not a camp yet, it's just Green Lake. She lives in that cabin with the 2 oak trees. Who lives in that cabin with the 2 oak trees now? The warden. And Kate Barlow tells Trout Walker and his wife that they're going to dig and dig and dig, and their children and their children and their children's children will dig and dig and dig. And what goes on at Green Lake now? It's Camp Green Lake, where boys do what? Dig holes every day. All right, kiddos, chapter 27 is going to be your best place for your essential question. We had a lot of good info on that very first section, but I want you to also use all of your background knowledge leading up to where we read today, okay? Everything you know about Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski. How are they the same? How are they different? Think about your character traits. How do you think they're thinking? How are they acting? That's going to be the biggest one, right? Because the story's not told from their point of view. It's told from Stanley's perspective. We don't really know how they're feeling. We don't really know how they're thinking. But we do know how they're acting, and we do know how they're speaking. The narrator tells us that. So think back to how has Mr. Pendanski been acting or speaking? What kind of words has he said to Stanley? How has he treated Stanley? What about Mr. Sir? What's he said to Stanley? How's he treated Stanley? Okay, so how are they the same? How are they different? If you need any help, kiddos, let me know. I have loved seeing your work on Google Classroom. Keep it up, keep it up, keep it up. If you're working on paper, if you have a question, have mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, whoever it is, send me a message. We can talk and I can help you out, okay? I miss you, kiddos. I love you, kiddos, and I will see you later.